Imagine buying a one-way ticket to absolute paradise, only to step off the ship and find yourself in a literal living nightmare. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unraveling the Prince of Poyais scam. This is a 19th century deception so incredibly profound, it really just proves how completely vulnerable the human imagination can be. Okay, let's dive right into this because the people who bought into the stream, they were promised a thriving, breathtaking nation. We're talking flourishing farms, bustling capital cities, and rivers that were quite literally lined with gold. It was marketed as the ultimate opportunity for a fresh start and serious prosperity. But the reality they actually faced when their ships finally dropped anchor? Yeah, there were no grand ports, zero marble buildings. They stepped off into a brutal, untamed, disease-ridden swamp. It was an absolute death trap. And the guy who sold them this devastating lie? Well, he was thousands of miles away, safely sipping champagne in London, literally counting the immense fortune he'd just stolen from them. And remember, this wasn't some modern internet scam or a sophisticated digital Ponzi scheme plotted behind a computer screen. No, this went down in the early 19th century. The architect of this green hell was history's most audacious con man, Sir Gregor MacGregor. So that brings us to the $1 million, or, perhaps more accurately, the £1,000,000 question. How did one man invent an entire country out of thin air? How on earth could he possibly convince hundreds of highly intelligent, hardworking people, everyone from wealthy merchants to desperate working-class families, to walk straight into such a massive, labyrinthine confidence game? Well, to understand how the trap was set, we first have to understand the mind of the guy who set it. Let's trace MacGregor's rapid and honestly pretty chaotic trajectory. Born on Christmas Eve in 1786 in Stirlingshire, Scotland, he came from a clan with this legendary, rebellious history. But just clan lore was nearly enough for him. At just 16 years old, he actually bought a commission in the British Army. When military life proved a bit too slow for his staggering ambition, he crossed the Atlantic to fight for South American independence right under Simón Bolívar. And here is the crazy twist. He was genuinely brave on the battlefield. He really earned medals and rose to the rank of general. But by 1820, after the death of his first wife and the loss of her fortune, he drifted back to London, entirely broke and deeply in debt. Now, what's really interesting about this is how MacGregor wasn't just broke. He was a guy completely addicted to high society, with an insatiable appetite for self-aggrandizement. He literally demanded everyone call him General MacGregor, parading around London in these incredibly ostentatious uniforms, and grossly embellishing his military feats to literally anyone who would listen. His staggering ego, combined with just sheer desperation to maintain his elite status, meant he desperately needed a masterstroke to save himself. And, well, he found it, by weaponizing the human imagination. So in 1820, MacGregor returns from Central America claiming he had secured this massive land grant along the Mosquito Coast of Honduras. He tells the British public this land is roughly the size of Wales. The actual truth, he had coerced a local tribal leader into signing a super vague agreement for a sliver of completely useless swampy jungle. But MacGregor didn't see a worthless tract of land. No, he looked at that mud and saw the raw material for a sprawling empire. He basically elevated this tiny sliver of jungle into a fully independent, civilized nation in his own mind, and he named it Poyais. But, every nation needs a ruler, right? So MacGregor simply crowns himself the absolute ruler, bestowing upon himself the grand title of Cazique, which basically translates to a sovereign prince. He wasn't just a broke soldier anymore. In his mind, he was literal royalty. And with his fictional nation all set up in his head, he packed his bags and prepared to unleash this trap on the British public. But of course, a scam this massive needs the perfect environment to really thrive. And MacGregor found his perfect mark in post-Napoleonic Britain. The entire country was gripped by intense economic anxiety right then. Inflation was sky high, jobs were incredibly scarce, and people were just desperate for a way out. MacGregor specifically targeted his fellow Scots by playing the patriotic card. He offered them a chance at boundless wealth, and even redemption from the disastrous Darien scheme a century prior, where Scotland lost an absolute fortune trying to colonize Panama. He wasn't just selling land here, he was selling hope to a deeply desperate population. Let's move on and see how this builds, because to convince an entire empire that a tropical wasteland is the new El Dorado, you really have to build a solid infrastructure of lies. MacGregor went ahead and established an official Poyais embassy right in the heart of central London. He opened government offices. He hired entirely legitimate, respectable bankers and real estate agents. He calculated every single step to manufacture this unwavering institutional trust. I mean, if the banks and the embassy said it was real, who were everyday citizens to doubt it, right? But he didn't stop at just fake offices. He knew he needed physical evidence to hand to his investors, so he commissioned this lavish, extraordinarily detailed guidebook all about this fictional paradise. Written under a pseudonym to appear completely independent, this guidebook wasn't just a flimsy pamphlet. It was a staggering 350 pages long. 350 pages of total fabrication, meticulously documenting every single fictional detail of a tropical wasteland just to make it irresistible. And this brilliantly illustrates the devastating contrast we're talking about. The 350-page guidebook claimed the capital city, St. Joseph, was a bustling metropolis filled with Gothic cathedrals, grand opera houses, and wide, sweeping boulevards. The reality? An empty, untamed swamp. The economy was promised to feature rivers literally lined with gold nuggets and massive mahogany forests. In reality, it was just worthless mud. And the climate? The book promised this perpetual, gentle spring breeze with absolutely zero tropical disease. The actual reality, tragically for the settlers who went there, was rampant, deadly disease. The contrast between the lie and the truth is just staggering. So, with the illusion perfectly set, MacGregor monetized the lie with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. The scam reached an absolute fever pitch. He printed his own proprietary Poyais as currency. He issued government bonds through those super respectable London banking houses, and the elite actually fought over them. Wealthy merchants and military officers liquidated their life savings, but perhaps most heartbreakingly of all, he sold land certificates at manageable, affordable rates so the working class could buy in too. Entire families traded everything they had for a piece of this complete mirage. So the crucial point here is that the sheer mechanics of MacGregor's fraud were brilliantly evil precisely because they exploited institutional trust. He didn't just walk up to people on the street and ask for their money. He wove his lie into the very fabric of society's most trusted pillars. By relying on established banks, printing official-looking currency, and setting up an embassy, he made the lies simply too big to question. The institutions themselves unknowingly acted as his accomplices, basically validating a total fiction that would eventually cost hundreds of people their lives and their fortunes. Which really leaves us with a chilling realization. If a broke, desperate man in the 19th century could completely invent a sovereign nation out of thin air, manipulate major financial institutions, and convince hundreds of people to literally sail to their doom purely on the strength of a fabricated story and some printed paper, well, how vulnerable are we to the exact same illusions today? When we look around at modern institutions, digital currencies, and the highly polished narratives we are sold every single day, it really makes you wonder, have we actually learned to spot the mirage, or are we all just waiting for the next Prince of Poise? Think about that for a second. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.